this is an embedded national security problem now. We have over 7.3 million illegal migration crossings that have happened since basically border policy changed, right? They're here. We have deportable felons all over the U.S. embedded. They're bouncing city to city, state to state. They have criminal histories from Mexico, Honduras, other places, radicalized jihadists from the Middle East. Everybody's getting in that wants to get in. And I don't like to, this isn't like, hey, Andy, let's talk and get everybody fired up on paranoia, but let's just be realist, right? Let's be realist of what we're dealing with in the country and what we need to have from a preparedness standpoint, especially when we go to how are we going to solve this problem. And whatever we do on the border in November if the administration changes and suddenly that becomes a focus, I mean, I'm praying and crossing my fingers that it does, but whether it does or not, this is happening right now in America, border to border, north to south, where you and I are on the northern end, southern end, east and west. And we got to tackle this thing as a national priority. And it just gets more and more escalated. And when I spoke with that congressional committee, the overwhelming response when it was Q&A time was like, Lieutenant, we had no idea that there was environmental crime related in the foothills of the Silicon Valley from these poisons that these cartels have been doing for the better part of 20 years. And now they're just operating with impunity. We didn't know anything about Northern Cal, this fentanyl thing. I mean, we think border, but when you say Silicon Valley, or you say Kalispell, Montana, right? It just doesn't equate. And that was my point, was to drive that point home. And what I also exposed during that is what, ironically, you and I had talked about just 3 weeks before I went to Congress on Cleared Hot, was the China connection, the China poisons, the collaboration of the Chinese with the Mexican cartels using America as a middle ground. And basically at our expense, our public safety, our environmental destruction, the resources you and I love as conservationists, that's all basically up for grabs. Well, these guys make not millions, brother, but billions of cash dollars that they can launder in America. It doesn't even have to go back to the homeland either side. And they're building their empire for financial domination. They've got a currency control. There's all kinds of, multi-level objectives in doing crime in America, but we're the victim because we're so open right now. So one of many things we got to look at, and we got to look at this as being here right now and, not focus so much, hey, let's lock the border up. That's a two-pronged argument. We got to do what's internal because it is a problem now, and it goes way beyond just border control.
Well, that's leading me as I'm listening to you unpack this, and I think it's very rare. I always appreciate the conversations I get to have with people that either A, work directly, I wouldn't say on border policy, because most of the people I have talked to are agents that are not involved with ICE. They're more on the enforcement end of the policies that they have no hand creating. Right. But then, when what you're talking about is this influx of people. So as a thought experiment, let's say, and I know that this is impossible, that border policy does shift. We'll call it the beginning of 2025. And even though it's impossible, let's say it's like a spigot and we can turn it off. How long do you think it would actually take, though, to deal with the problem that is already here, let alone, the spigot being turned off? Again, hypothetical, not actually possible. And I do believe we should have a legal immigration process, right? I'm not saying we should shut that down at all. But let's say we shut down the influx. How long do you think, or is it even truly possible to actually wrap our hands around the potential issue that we already have here? And if we were able to do so, how long do you think, in your opinion, it would take to actually handle that?
That's a great question, man. And I would say if we stop the spigot right now and got a great administration with good policy ideas and made that a national priority, we're going to control the border. We're going to do legitimate immigration in a controlled manner. We're going to get people here from a melting pot that want to chase the American dream. Hey, America is a melting pot and it's the greatest thing. That needs to continue. And that's why we are what we are. But we're not talking about that, right? It's apples and oranges. How are we going to stop the criminality? How are we going to stop that? And even if we made it a national priority and through every resource we have at it, whether it's education, law enforcement, working with Mexico, working with other countries, we're talking years, man. We're talking years because 7.3 million people, that's a heck of a hit. And even if 10% or less of that 7.3 million have any criminality in them, are cartel related or associates involved in some way, active jihadists, whatever the case may be, we're still talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals that are very dangerous in this country. And from your operational career, and I know from mine, rounding those people up that have made a lifetime career of hiding in plain sight, It's not an easy,
Good luck with that.
it's fucking crazy. It's not an easy thing to do. And do we really have the resources between local, state, and federal LE in the country right now, especially with everything we're dealing with the unrest, the defund the police push, which fortunately we're starting to see a backlash because obviously that don't work. It's going to take a lot of years. It's going to take a lot of years. And my thing is pushing, like our mutual friends in this type of realm push, preparedness and education. I mean, I think we all need to be aware, no matter how uncomfortable this story is. And I got this a lot in Congress, and I know you and I have talked about this, the whole hidden war concept of the weed cartels and what it's morphed into of being a national problem outside of weed. Weed is just one small part of this polycrime. Human trafficking, right, brother? Child sex trafficking, which the Sound of Freedom movie fortunately made it so visceral for the general public to go, oh my God, that's really, really a horrendous problem. That's evil incarnate, you know, and the US is the biggest consumer of that heinous activity. So the cartels are involved in that, various Mexican cartels and other foreign cartels. So anything to make a buck at the expense, they're going to do. And until we, everybody gets a level of preparedness to understand what the problem really is, and enough voters push for that being a priority, and not just money, but education on what to look for in a trafficking scenario if you're walking home with or without your child, or your child's walking home alone from school, or however they're moving around. You and I talked about the fentanyl pills. One prescription opioid lookalike is a deadly pill. How do we educate our kids on not to take that for a painkiller because they think it came out of, you know, a legitimate prescribed painkiller bottle, and not necessarily to experiment with drugs or get high at a party, but hey, a very driven athlete. And I have a valedictorian level 1 here in the Silicon Valley of a daughter of a very close relative. Valedictorian, this happened a year ago. She was a volleyball scholarship. She was in multiple sports, had, you know, a strained knee, ended up getting one of those dirty fentanyl pills in the Silicon Valley in an affluent community by mistake. Went into her bedroom that night to study with a knee ache, had taken that pill from a friend earlier at school after practice, and she didn't wake up the next morning, and mom couldn't wake her up. So that's everywhere, man. If it's on Indian tribal reservations that we're seeing, not far from where you and I are at Montana, and we're seeing it, you know, in the affluent Silicon Valley, and a valedictorian girl that had a great future ahead of her and a college scholarship ready to rock, that's a problem. And I think everybody can relate to that. So we got to educate. And you brought up some great points on Cleared Hot when we were saying, you know, do we have test kits for our kids? And like, we're not sanctioning it, but are we saying, hey, if you're going to go there, I'm dad, you know, I'm uncle, I'm granddad, I'm mom. You may not listen to me when you're with your friends. Be sure you're smart. Don't touch it. But, you know, where do you go with that? But these are real questions we have to ask, and you brought that up beautifully, and, you know, and we had a pretty good discussion on it. And I've actually thought a lot about that discussion since we last talked, because we can't attack it as operators, man. We can't just go plugging the hole on the dam of the leaky, crappy dam. We can't play whack-a-mole. We need to change it from internal. Kids need to know what to do. They need to be trained. Adults need to be trained. And it just has to be a comprehensive thing. And I think when we handle it, like some of the money we're throwing at these proxy wars around the globe, the billions of dollars going overseas for those type of operations, when the biggest domestic eco-terrorist war we're having is right here in America, and that's not an exaggeration. Let's put that funding there. You know, let's put that on the top 5 list. And that's all I keep pushing with the hidden war message. This thing just keeps getting worse and worse as the cartels get more embedded and they get more incentivized because of bad policy, and it's got to stop.